My wife and I are going to move in with my parents, so you're going to have to leave right away. 3 years ago, I suddenly received such a call from my ex-husband, who had eloped with my sister and disappeared. When I was wondering what was going on, he told me that he would take care of his parents, so I, a stranger, should leave the house. I don't know what he misunderstood, but I told my ex-husband in dismay. What? Your parents' house is a vacant lot now. Both my ex-husband and younger sister raised their voices in disbelief when I say this. I decided to give them the harsh reality lesson for betraying and hurting me. My name is Hannah. My husband Jack and I used to work together as boss and employee. But we later developed a romantic relationship and got married when I was 28 years old. I left the company right after we got married. There was a rule: when a boss dates an employee in the same department and they get married, one of them has to be transferred. My husband had just been promoted to section manager at the time, and a transfer would have threatened his career. On the other hand, I was an ordinary employee, and my husband had expressed his wish for me to join his family after marriage, so I readily accepted the request. I thought that if I was going to have a child, I would have to take leave anyway. So I simply thought it would be okay to start working again after having a child. So I resigned from the company I had worked at for many years, much to regret with my colleagues. However, within a few months of our marriage, our relationship began to crumble. It was my sister, Stella, who started it all. My husband fell in love with my 5-year younger sister, who was 23 at the time. My parents had passed away early, so my sister was the only one I introduced as my family member at the wedding. My husband was attracted to her because apparently he found it endearing that she had graduated college with a scholarship and did not want to cause any trouble for me. However, only I, her older sister, knows that Stella is not as innocent and pleasant as she looks. Her character is something she faked to be loved by those around her, but inside, she's a black-hearted person who only thinks of how to outwit others. I recall that we had trouble when we inherited our parents' estate. She said that since she was smarter and had a better future, that she was entitled to 80% of the inheritance. I was so upset when she said things like that, but it made no sense to me. So I was uncomfortable introducing my husband to her, but I didn't want to be scolded later about why I hadn't introduced her. I had decided that my introductions were necessary for the sake of formality, but I had no idea this was going to do the wrong thing. Anyway, my husband had been in love with my sister from the first time he met her. Even after he married me, he had kept these feelings smoldering in his heart. I first became aware of my husband's feelings when he suddenly told me that he was going on a business trip and he would not be able to come home for a month to 6 months at most. It wasn't strange for my husband, who is now a section manager, to go on business trips because he works in sales. That's why when I heard that, I just took it in. I mentioned over lunch with a former colleague whom I had not seen in a while since after my marriage. Then my colleague told me the truth with a questioning look on her face. She told me she knew nothing about my husband going on a business trip, but that he would be taking the week off from that day. I thought it was strange and immediately questioned my husband about it that night. That's just what they're saying to others. After all, we have a top secret sales operation and I can't tell an ordinary employee about it. If you have any doubts, you were thinking the wrong thing. When he said that, I became even more and more suspicious of him. But in the end, I was unable to do anything about it. And because my husband left the house on his business trip as planned, 3 days after he left, I went to see a physician because I was not feeling well. I often catch colds, so I thought it was just the change of season. But for some reason, I was referred to by an OBGYN. There, to my surprise and confusion, I found out that I was pregnant. I wondered whether to report it to my husband. There is a possibility my husband, who is on a suspicious business trip, is having an affair. I wasn't feeling like reporting the pregnancy to my suspicious husband, when the phone rang suddenly. I wonder if my husband used his telepathy or something, but I was wrong. It was my mother-in-law on the other end. She said she wanted to give us our wedding gift because she hadn't given it to us yet. She had no choice but to call me because my husband did not pick up. I reassured her that my husband was currently on a business trip and probably just too busy to notice the call. I then went to my in-laws' house without informing my husband of my pregnancy. I told them about the pregnancy at the same time as I received my wedding gift. My parent-in-laws only had one child, my husband, and his child would be their first grandchild, which they had long awaited for. So they were very happy to hear that I was pregnant. But I had mixed feelings inside. Of course, I was happy to be pregnant, but I was worried about the uncertainties that lay ahead. Time flew by, and a week passed. My husband left on his business trip. Then he suddenly came home with my sister. I promised to marry Stella. We won't have any kids between us. And I don't have to be responsible for your life. If only we had married a few months, right? So please divorce me. I was confronted just like that, with divorce papers. I was shocked to learn the fact that my husband was connected to my sister. However, after many discussions, I could not come to an agreement. I was suffering from morning sickness and wanted to get rid of this divorce talk quickly. So I gave in and decided to accept the divorce. Of course, I demanded alimony from my sister and my husband, but I chose not to tell them about the pregnancy and not to receive any child support. I didn't want to continue to be connected with such a heartless person for child support in the future. So I decided to become independent and do my best not to put my child through a lot of hardship. 3 years later, I received an unexpected call from my ex-husband, who had not contacted me at all since the divorce was finalized. At first, I ignored the call, but he was so persistent that I picked up the phone in frustration. Then my ex-husband started saying things like this. I heard from somebody that you're living with my parents now, right? And that you gave birth to my son without telling me, right? Why didn't you tell me? I could have paid some child support for you. I wondered who in the world had told my ex-husband such a thing, and it was a former colleague. However, the information was too old, as I had little contact with her since the divorce. So I tried to tell him about my current situation with my husband. He said something more surprising. Well, I know it's sudden, but my wife and I are going to move in with my parents, so you're going to have to leave right away. My parents are getting old and need care, you know. My parents will be happier with a son and a young daughter-in-law than with you, a stranger. It was so sad for my husband's parents after I realized that their son was trying to take advantage of them. They even got down on their knees on behalf of their son, who apologized for his actions. It made me want to vomit. You know, I think you're misunderstanding something. When I started to speak, my ex-husband became silent. Perhaps noticing the change in the tone of my voice, I took a deep breath and I told the truth. Your parents' house is a vacant lot now. My husband let out a dumb-sounding what? I also heard a woman's voice that sounded like my sister, complaining that that was not what she was told. I had gone out of my way, avoiding to make things too big. But if he was going to get carried away and do something like this, I wouldn't quit either. I was determined to make amends for what he had done. I tried to further my drive and my ex-husband into a corner, who has now gone silent. You are right that I'm living in your parents' house, but now that dilapidated house has been torn down. The land has been sold, and I heard the new convenience store is going to be built there. He was obviously surprised to find out that his parents' house is gone. That's a lie. Then where do you live? He asked, voice slightly cracking. Of course, I have no obligation to tell that person where we live. However, I did briefly tell him the kind of life we were leading now. I suggested that we might as well buy a ready-built house to live in, since the two of them are getting older and need care. So now the four of us are living in a newly built house. Your parents cut ties with the two of you, right? Don't worry. I'll take care of them so you guys can go ahead and do your own thing. Then my ex-husband started insinuating there was no way we had the financial resources to buy a house like that and that it was all a lie. He even said that my in-laws had been spoiling me since I had to quit my job to be a housewife when we got married. I was so angry when he said that to me, even though he didn't know anything. If you think I'm still unemployed after 3 years, you must have a very sick mind. I work full-time. They have a daycare center. And I used my savings from when I was single and my in-law savings to buy the house. I'm the one who pays for most of our living expenses now, so I don't need you to tell me what I can and cannot do. When I told him in a sharp tone, my husband became silent again. It seems that he was planning to lower my position by saying this and that to get me to leave. But it didn't go as planned. My sister seems to be complaining about something too, but I didn't care about the two of them anymore. You and I are divorced, and I'm not so needy that I can't survive without you paying child support. It's been 3 years since your parents cut you off, so don't start acting like a good son now. I told him to stay out of our lives, hung up the phone, and blocked his number. I thought I had finally ended it with my ex-husband, but I learned later that his obsession was incredibly strong. This is where the real work began. I wondered where he got the information, but he came to my workplace. When I got to work as usual, I had a bad feeling because I saw a familiar car parking in the visitors' parking lot. I had entered the office with a sense of caution, and sure enough, there was an ex-husband arguing with the receptionist. At first, I was taken aback since I never thought he would go this far. But then I realized something. My ex-husband has been very neat and tidy since we first met. He always forced himself to look good in expensive clothes because he was concerned about what others would think. But here my ex-husband was wearing a shabby t-shirt and pants with holes in them that were clearly unfashionable. He also had a long, unkempt beard and shaggy hair that just looked filthy by looking at his side profile. When I thought something was obviously wrong, my ex-husband noticed me and started to approach me. And then, I finally found you. Why aren't you answering your phone? Whatever. Now that I find you, you're all mine. You're in a pretty good position at this company now. Making a lot of money, right? Support me and my wife. I was at a loss for words, and he went that far beyond what I expected. Only his parents know my current workplace. I didn't tell my ex-colleagues because I didn't want my ex-husband to get the information. His parents told me that they lost contact with their son, and even when he comes, they would just ignore him. This means that they used some sort of method to identify my workplace and my status, and I can feel sweat running down my back. I really didn't think he would go this far. Can you not come to my workplace? You're troubling everybody here. And I don't know how hard your life is, but I have no intention of supporting you guys. With that said, I tried to slip past my ex-husband, but he grabbed me by the wrist. Then, with bloodshot eyes, my ex-husband said, "We're family, aren't we? You're raising my kid. That's a good enough reason to live with me. And moreover, Stella, she's your only immediate family. Don't you feel sorry when you see me dressed like this?" I don't feel sorry for you even when you say things like that. You ran away from your family and you said you eloped with my sister. So what are you saying to me now? I shake off his hand and I glare at him. My ex-husband, seeing the devilish expression on his face I had never seen before, flinched and backed away. I pulled out my phone from my bag, showed me the number, and I dialed 911. I told him if he didn't get the hell out, I was ready to call the police. Then he instantly turned blue and ran away. I apologized to the people around me. They think the reaction was slightly exaggerated with the mere mention of the police. They smiled and forgave me, saying that even though they didn't know the whole story, this time it was my ex-husband's fault, so I shouldn't worry about it. I told them that they should give him a warning if he comes to my workplace in the future, and if he didn't listen, they were free to call the police. My ex-husband stopped coming to my office and did not contact me. I was relieved that my actions turned him into the police and had worked so well. But then an unexpected incident occurred. My son is in the daycare facility right next to my workplace, and I pick him up right after school when we go home together. So today, as usual, I went to go pick up my son, where I saw many police officers creating a very serious atmosphere. I had heard the sirens of the police cars very close earlier, but I had no idea that they were in front of the daycare center. I was wondering if a suspicious person had appeared. When I realized that it was my ex-husband who was being held, I sighed. I guessed he was trying to take my son away from the daycare, claiming to be his father. However, I already warned the staff about the incident the other day, And when the police told me what happened, I felt anger towards my ex-husband because it was exactly what I had expected. I don't mind if he comes for me 100 times, but I cannot allow him to harm my workplace or my son. When I approached my ex-husband, who was being held down, he looked at me with pleading eyes and tearfully said, "I just wanted to see my kid. As you can see me, I'm having a terrible life right now because of your sister's wild spending sprees. It's just not right that I'm going to get reported and arrested because I came to see my kid." What is he talking about? That was the first thought that came to me. Even though I refused, as long as he had not paid child support, he absolutely had no right to play father to my son. I think he's probably not even able to pay child support right now, and he's probably bluffing like the other day when he said he could have paid it. Anyway, I wondered to what extent of a person he was, who can't live without causing others trouble. "What you're doing is basically kidnapping, and of course they would report you if a man suddenly barged in on them. Wouldn't they? Besides, Stella's extravagant spending habits are none of my business. She's your wife, so you should control her." I gave him a cold stare. My ex-husband suddenly shouted at the top of his lungs and tried to get violent, shaking off the police's restraint. Thankfully, the other police officers immediately covered for me and I was not injured. My ex-husband was arrested on the spot on charges of obstruction of justice and assault. Later, when the police talked to me, I learned about why my husband had acted in such a foolish manner. Apparently, after he divorced me and remarried my sister, she revealed her dark side and started spending money like water. She even got into debt by paying millions of dollars to a comparison or something without telling my ex-husband. And in just 3 years, they were both saddled with a huge debt. I actually finished giving birth at this point and moved out with his parents. I think my ex-husband must have gotten the information that they were both living together and contacted me before showing up at his parents' house, which led to this. This is when he first found out that his parents' house had been removed and that he and my sister began to have problems. They were in need of money and were thinking of relying on his parents. But their hopes were cut off and they got into a big fight. And originally, he had a detective look me up and stalked me. Then foolishly got close to my son. I was not showing any chance of giving in at all. After hearing this story, I was appalled at the same time. I thought that he deserved it. It was very nice to see him and my sister fall into the abyss after he chose my sister over me, forced his parents to clean up the mess. In the end, you could say they were punished for taking away someone's happiness. My ex-husband was later indicted and sentenced to prison after various extra charges were discovered. He was involved in some shady things that violated the law, which made clear why he acted so abnormally to the act of calling the police that time. My sister lost her friends when they talked about her behind her back that she's a criminal's wife, was now unhappy and after having an affair. And she left her job and her relationships broke down at work. She's managed to survive by working a night job, but she's of a pretty good age, so I'm not sure how long she will be able to survive. In short, both of them have no hope. But I guess it's a natural outcome for two people who have caused such a terrible mess in so many areas. When I heard that my ex-husband was in jail, I decided to sell the house that we bought and moved to a faraway place. With my in-laws, of course. I don't know when my ex-husband will get out of prison, and I'm afraid that my son will be in danger if we continue to live there. Fortunately, 10 years have passed, and now we're living peacefully without any contact from my ex-husband. My father-in-law passed away a few years ago, but my ex-husband, who was supposed to be out of prison, never showed his face, and the estate was inherited by my mother-in-law and myself. I also heard about my sister from a mutual acquaintance, but they said she can no longer make money at her night job, and now she has a cleaning job to make a living for her every day. I'm so glad everybody ended up with what they deserved.